Good afternoon, Britain. Welcome back. It's now 2:41 in the afternoon, and criminals are getting to pick their gender. Yes, this is all because the government is refusing to force police and the NHS to record biological sex in their records, even though it was recommended by an independent review. It's feared that the self-ID policy, deciding what your gender identity is, which remains widely enforced, skews some of these crime statistics. Well, joining us now is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater. Maya, it's quite incredible that public bodies, including the NHS and the police, which is what I'm most concerned about, are recording the gender identity of perpetrators of crimes rather than their biological sex. How did we get to this place?
It's happened really over the past 10 years. What happened was, for years and years, all public bodies collected your sex. It was very simple, sex, male or female. And then about 10 years ago, they started saying gender. And they still meant sex. It was sort of, I think, seen as more polite. And when you used to have paper forms, if you wrote sex on it, people would say yes, please. So it was just used to say as a more polite way of saying sex. And then that shifted to being gender identity, and there was more than two options. So it was male, female, other, preferred self-describe, and so on. And so the meaning of male and female shifted from being about sex to being about gender identity without really any parliamentary oversight, anyone thinking through what the implications would be, and certainly not thinking through what the risks and harm for women were.
It makes me think of the number of cases that are written up in the press where you have a transgender woman who's been convicted or is in court for the rape of a woman or sexual assault of a woman, and they're referred to as she.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the most obscene example of this. Rape is a crime that can only be done by a man in this country. So anyone who's accused of being a rapist is by definition a man. And to call that person she, whether it's in the police station, in the police records, in court, or in newspapers and reporting of it, is a further abuse of what is almost always a female victim.
And I guess in the NHS, I mean, huge health concerns that potentially diagnoses are incorrect, inaccurate, because they're taking down the gender identity rather than the biological sex. And we know that different things happen to men and women according to their biology. That's pretty obvious. We've known that for a long time. But just reading your tweet, you seem to be in consensus with what Wes Streeting has had to say about this morning. He said that the Sullivan review underlines the importance of recording biological sex, not just for research and insight, but also for patient safety. Doing so does not prevent us from recording, recognising and respecting people's gender identity when these differ. So are you supportive of that essentially these bodies, including the NHS, can record both the gender identity and the biological sex?
I think the most important thing is that they record the biological sex, which is sex. That's the default. If somebody then wants to say, I'd like to be called Z, or some other pronoun, that can be recorded along with, whether they're a vegetarian or other particular personal circumstances. But it's not a category about a person in the way that sex is. And it certainly shouldn't be recorded in those fields that are supposed to be immutable, that you're supposed to be able to trust. There's all kinds of things in your medical records that you can write down, but in the data fields where it says sex, it should mean sex.
OK, well, Maya Forstater, thank you very much indeed. It's very alarming that a public body would choose to only record the gender identity of a person, even in our police, even when someone's convicted of a crime. I mean, quite incredible. Mind boggles. It does look as though Wes Streeting, at least when it comes to the NHS, is saying that both should be recorded, that biological sex actually matters, which is nice. It's not always the case that politicians seem to think that does matter.